Parents of summer school students in Detroit give us a glimpse of what school reopenings might look like. It's not pretty. We'll talk with Superintendent Nikolai Vitti. The Beaumont health system is being rocked by more than the pandemic. We'll talk about the turmoil with CEO John Fox. And we'll point to primary election day, now just 9 days away. Today is Sunday, July 26, 2020, and this is Flashpoint.
Hi, welcome to Flashpoint after a very turbulent week on a number of fronts, from an international showdown between the U.S. and China to the violence that is shedding so much blood in many American cities. So much of the turbulence traces back to the coronavirus pandemic, which is overtaking tempers, outlooks for the future, and lives. Consider Florida, where right now someone is dying of COVID-19 every 8 minutes. The return of baseball isn't really a return to normalization either. The empty stadiums just reminders of how dystopian our world has become. There are hopes that getting kids back in school might create some normalcy, but if summer school in Detroit is any indication, that's not going to be anything close to normal either. In a moment, Detroit Superintendent Nikolai Vitti will join me to talk about it. Also, you know that hospitals have been under intense pressure during the pandemic. At Beaumont Health System, the pressure has been amplified by plans for a merger and some nasty unrest that has doctors passing around a petition that declares no confidence in the system's leaders. One of those leaders, CEO John Fox, will join me in a moment to talk about whether the panic surrounding one of Southeast Michigan's most prestigious health institutions is warranted. And we continue our countdown to primary election day. It is a week from this Tuesday. The pandemic just blew a hole in the Republican National Convention. What does it do to the August 4th primary? We'll talk about it today on Flashpoint. Well, this week we saw parents blocking school buses, arrests being made, and this is just summer school in Detroit. What happens when the fall term begins? Let's talk about it with the superintendent of DPSCD schools, Dr. Nikolai Vitti. Dr. Vitti, good to have you back on Flashpoint again. I'm curious as to whether you think what we've been watching over these last couple of days is something that's sort of specific to summer school, or are we getting a look at the trouble that we're headed toward with opening up for the fall?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily specific to summer school. I believe that a lot of the concerns and issues that the protesters or even others in the community have signaled and expressed about face-to-face instruction is beyond summer and will move into the fall. But I think what is being ignored in the conversation is the fact that we're just meeting the needs of parents and students in Detroit. That's our responsibility as a school district, to meet parents and students where they are educationally. And if Novi is offering face-to-face instruction or e-course, so should we. In fact, if Novi is offering face-to-face instruction, it's even more reason why we have to do that in Detroit, because on average, our parents have greater needs and challenges than those parents in Novi or in other school districts. So this is never about a one-size-fits-all approach. We don't believe that school right now should just be about online or just face-to-face. And if we're going to do face-to-face, it has to look profoundly different than it did before. And it is. It is in the summer. It will in the fall. The board the finance committee approved $29 million in COVID-related safety equipment and procedures. And so it needs to look different. It will look different. But let's not forget about the voice of our parents that are asking for face-to-face and or online, and we have to provide both.
Well, in fact, what gets tricky here, Dr. Vitti, is the opposite, I guess, of one size fits all, which is everybody expecting, each individual household and family expecting something very specific to them, their own answers. I guess local control to the extreme, because isn't that part of the problem here? The vast experience and expectations of parents, students, and teachers is all over the place right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a factor. I think the broader issue is that we have a president that has not created an effective national strategy to contain COVID. And then when you bring that to the educational level, declaring that all schools should open without a safety plan, a funding plan, when school systems are already scrapped or in a difficult situation financially, strapped financially, then to ask to do more with less is problematic. But in Detroit, we received $80 million of Federal CARES Act that we can spend over the next 2 years. So we actually do have additional resources to spend on COVID-related expenses. COVID is not going away, as we know. The infection rate in Detroit is at 1 to 1.5%, which is lower than other large urban school districts in the country, and even areas in Michigan that's skyrocketing.
Yeah.
We believe at about 3% or lower is safe. We'll take the lead of the state government on that. But in the end, this has become, unfortunately, a political conversation, and one without the resources in a lot of different areas, and we're forgetting about children and families right now.
Well, we've had a judge, though, of course, that now has famously ordered that all the students attending summer school had to be tested. We've had some positive tests out of that, as we expected we would. We'll have more positive tests as we go forward. But is the district set up to test everybody who heads back to school, and how often do you feel like you have to do that?
Right. So 274 parents have tested at this point as of yesterday. We're having more testing today, but 2 out of 274 means that we're below the infection rate in the city.
Right.
But what it also shows that is after 2 weeks of summer school, we're not spreading it. So the 2 cases were in 2 different schools, 2 students that didn't even know each other in different communities. So the key is going to be the COVID safety strategies to prevent the spread into the future. But to your question, we thought about student testing going into the summer and even into the fall. We didn't know if we could scale the testing and it could be accessible, free. The city has stepped in wonderfully to help us with this group of testing. But as a school system, we're not likely to support student testing unless all Detroit charter schools test and possibly all Wayne County school districts test. That's a higher hurdle to jump. This judge's decision was completely out of bounds, not supported by any legal mandates. He just felt he was doing the right thing. But it also shows how far parents are willing to go to get face-to-face instruction, with more than half now agreeing to test, despite fears and concerns about the test itself. But at this point, the parents have not complained about the test, and students haven't complained either. It's a juvenile no swab, not as intrusive and intense as the adult one.
What do you say then to the parents who have been showing up at the bus yards, and how do you ease their fears?
Are you speaking to the protesters?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say that not many of those protesters are DPS ED parents. Some are. But that doesn't make up the majority of the protesters. Most of the protesters have been agitators for years. I think they have brought up some legitimate points, but their position is that schools just should not open, and that's not a place of discussion, compromise. But more importantly, it's not a place that meets children and families where they are. If anyone knows our parents, they know that they need options. They need a school system that's nimble and flexible.
And I wanted to make
protesters are not thinking about those parents.
I wanted to make sure before we wrapped up that I got to one of those options. Do you feel like the online portion of this, should we end up having to go back to learning from home? Have we learned a lot from the last 3 months of the previous school year? Have we fixed that and made it better if that's where we end up having to go?
Yeah, I don't believe online learning will ever supersede face-to-face instruction, but I will say as a system, we are much better prepared for online learning. All of our students will have devices, all of them will have internet access. We have a platform where all of our curriculum can be accessed online, grading can be issued, our teachers are going to be trained again this summer. So we're in a much better position to improve the quality, but I still think the option of face-to-face is important as long as it's healthy to do.
You bet. We will be talking to you again as we march toward the opening of school. Thank you so much for your time. Your work is awfully important, and we wish you all the best, Dr. Beatty.
Thank you.
You bet. Back with more in just a minute. We'll talk about some turmoil inside the Beaumont healthcare system. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
Are you looking for a new store to provide you those endless unique choices for your next barbecue celebration or family dinner? Joe's Produce Gourmet Market in Livonia is your new store. Joe's in Livonia carries the freshest and finest gourmet products, meat, seafood, produce, craft beers, fine wine, fresh baked bread, and the most delicious homemade desserts. We guarantee what you thought was the best just got better. Joe's Produce Gourmet Market. See you today.
Life is what you make it at Joe's.
In Lila's Good Health, if you've been putting off needed medical care, don't.
During this pandemic, our health facilities are all positioned well to care for the non-COVID medical needs of our patients.
At St. Joe's and Mercy Health, patients are getting essential care, including cancer operations and procedures for conditions that can lead to stroke or heart damage.
We are concerned that people are putting off needed medical care, so we want them to know we're here for them.
Even in a pandemic, when you need medical care, it's available. For St. Joe's and Mercy Health, I'm Lila Lazarus.
Always there for you. Come experience the Gowling difference at Gowling Alfa Romeo of Birmingham.
Shop with us online at Alfa Romeo of Birmingham.com for incredible offers from the comfort and safety of your home. During the Summer of Speed event, lease a 2020 Alfa Romeo Giulia with all-wheel drive for just $309 a month. Or lease the 2020 Alfa Romeo Stelvio with all-wheel drive for $349 a month. Don't wait. Visit Alfa Romeo of Birmingham.com today.
Hey Metro Detroit, we've come so far, fought so hard, sacrificed so much. Let's not lose ground to this virus now. You've heard it all before, and it still applies. Don't take unneeded risks. Michiganders, watch out for each other. Let's stay the course and stay safe.
Welcome back. Southeast Michigan is, of course, blessed with some truly elite healthcare facilities and systems. Beaumont certainly among them. But there's been a great deal of turmoil in the system with the prospect of a merger with Advocate Aurora on top of the pandemic. And now there's been an exodus of talent and petitions against management adding to the drama. Let's talk about it all with John Fox, back with us, the CEO of Beaumont Health System. John, before we get into the merger talk, let me first have you characterize, if you could, where you feel like we are. We're certainly not seeing hospitals in Michigan or in Detroit overwhelmed like they were back in March, but where do you feel like we are right now with the pandemic?
Well, we're in a better place. We certainly are through that initial surge where we shot up to over 1,300 patients across Beaumont Health. Right now, we are plateauing around 150 a day. Again, we think we're going to stay at that level pre-vaccine. That may oscillate a little bit. We are concerned about people continuing to observe good infection control, personal procedures between and amongst each other, social distancing, hand hygiene, all the other critical things we have to do, and that we stay on that so we avoid a second surge or anything like what we experienced back in March and April, which was extraordinary in terms of the speed and the ferocity from which it came on.
Are you starting to see patients return for the, I don't want to call them routine, some of them are far more critical and important than that, but are you starting to see patients return for the services that they were skipping because they were worried about the virus?
Yes, fortunately we are, because we were very concerned people were deferring their healthcare needs too long and letting their underlying conditions exacerbate. So we're at about 90% plus of our pre-COVID levels across all of our clinical programs, and gaining every day. And that's with the ongoing level of some COVID-19 across the system. But we're encouraging patients, don't ignore your healthcare issues. Please see your doctor, continue to get monitored, get treated where it's needed. Because that would be the other health calamity that could occur is people deferring their health care too long.
Well, let's move to the other, I guess, kind of a virus that seems to be moving through your health system right now, which is one of discontent. You've got petitions being signed right now and passed around among surgeons and other employees. You've got an exodus of talent, and a lot of it seems to circulate around the upcoming merger with Advocate Aurora, which I think some people characterize, it's a little bit like people sitting at a wedding going, what is she doing marrying him? He's so not in her league. league. And that's the way I think that people seem to feel that Beaumont is out of Advocate Aurora's league, and you should be doing better.
Well, I think that all those comments are fair. And again, we're spending a lot of time communicating with our physicians and others. I talked about 400 of them earlier in the week about, how should we go forward and, educating them on Advocate and Aurora. The reality of it is that, we can stay the way we are and just continue, but the healthcare environment is changing so fast, and it's only going to accelerate with the pandemic, that long ago, the Beaumont board said, let's consider what our partnership options are. And Advocate and Aurora are similar to us in that they are both community-based. They are both the strongest player in their respective market. They've done exceedingly well. They have competencies that we don't have. And I think sometimes people don't look to that. But to Beaumont's credit, we are particularly strong in areas where they are not. And I'll pick on the academic and research. So they find that attribute about us attractive, and we find their competencies where they can help us very attractive also.
Aren't you losing some of those pieces? Aren't some of those very vaunted and big names that you've got, the deepest end of your talent pool, aren't those some of the people that are leaving?
No, we lost 2 surgeons who went to California, which was unfortunate, but they've already been replaced. We've hired 4 more in and have recruited an extraordinary leader who, from credentials, I would put up against anybody's in terms of the quality of their training and the excellence of their work. And they've got a stronger academic background. So we think we're growing and improving. To say that we're losing talent is not correct. We have more cardiovascular surgeons now than we had a year ago, and and we continue to grow. Our biggest year for CV surgery, our biggest month, was last January. Just 4 months ago.
Well, some of the discontent, I think, seems to be, of course, over money. You had thousands of furloughs that you had to resort to for a while there as the pandemic got underway. Then you shed almost 500 jobs. All of that, according to, as Deadline Detroit was reporting, that you got about more than $300 million from the federal government as part of the relief money. And so I think there's been some suspicion that there's something funny going on here. And in fact, now you've got the Attorney General announcing that she's going to investigate not only the merger, but some of the business practices at Beaumont.
Well, here's the real reality and facts. At June 30th, we have lost in net income $148 million with the CARES money and everything else. The trauma that we've undergone on that side is that our revenue dropped 40% with the onslaught of the pandemic.
Sure.
So the CARES money was good, but it in no way covered all of that. We did furlough 2,400 employees, which I hated doing. We brought back over half of them already and want to bring back more with our volumes finally recovering. They were able to take advantage of the strong state and federal unemployment at $940 a week. And we also continue to cover them for their health insurance. So we stayed close to them. We helped them get the unemployment. And most importantly, we brought most of them back.
Which is important. John, I could talk to you about all this for another hour or so. It's such an important and urgent issue. But thank you so much for spending some time today, and best of luck to you and all your employees as well.
Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate your coverage, and let's keep the conversation going. Have a great day.
We sure will. John Fox, CEO of Beaumont Health System. We come back, we'll get you set for the primary on Flashpoint on Local 4.
Apartments.com makes getting into a new home easier than ever.
I thought you loved me.
Apartments.com, the most popular place to find a place.
There's a reason we have more cars, more brands, and more selection than any other dealer in Michigan. The reason is you. With 43 Michigan locations and 34 different brands, the Suburban Collection has more ways to make your purchase, service, and overall automotive experience the best in Michigan. From your first car to your dream car, and everything in between. Go to drivesuburban.com and get your car today.
A lot is happening in the heat of the summer, but in the midst of it all, the spirit of Detroit is shining bright.
That's why Local 4 and Click on Detroit are celebrating the people who are making lives better in Metro Detroit.
Join us tonight at 8 for our next primetime special, from keeping protests peaceful and feeding those in need
to a now famous group of extraordinary young singers.
Meet the inspirational people that truly embody the spirit of Detroit.
Tonight at 8 p.m. on Local 4.
Well, we're now down to a matter of days. 1 week from Tuesday will be the Michigan primary election. As we mentioned last week, sometimes primaries don't have a whole lot of drama to them. Not so this time around, not the least of which is because of the pandemic. Let me be joined by two of my favorite talkers when I want to get together and talk politics. On the right side of the screen, it's Jill Alper from Alper Strategies, and on the left side, Steve Mitchell from Mitchell Research. Thank you both so much. I'm curious as to, let me start by, I'm curious as to what both of you think the pandemic is going to do, whether it means all of the mail-in and whether or not we're ready to handle that, or if it's going to somehow help one side or the other. Jill, let me start with you. What do you think the virus does to primary election day?
Sure. Well, we saw in the previous spring elections that an increased turnout. And for this election, our Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, has mailed out 7.7 million ballot applications. She was able to do that with COVID funding provided by the federal government. We see that 1.8 million absentees have been requested. Usually at this point, about 507,000. Returned already 607,000 ballots, and that was 215,000 in 2016. So it's sort of a bad news, good news situation in terms of maybe the ballot mail out, making people more engaged, more aware that their elections, getting them to tune into who the candidates are, and they're certainly participating. We have satellite locations that are going to be open thanks to the passage of Proposal 3 in 2018, so people can get out and vote a couple of days early to avoid the polls. And then there'll be election day voting where clerks are taking extreme measures to make them safe and secure.
Steve, what's your take? What's it going to add up to?
Well, I think what you're going to see is an enormous number of people, and I'm seeing it in the polling I'm doing in legislative districts and other races around the state, that a high number of people are voting absentee that probably would not normally vote absentee. So what you're going to see is a much lower voter turnout on election day as a result of all these people voting by absentee ballot today. So generally, the higher the turnout, Democrats will benefit from that. And if that's the case in November, then that will inure to Joe Biden's advantage.
Steve, we also know, though, that the president and a number of Republican leaders have talked about mail-in voting either not being secure or not somehow being fair, that it's too easy to take advantage of. You've been around this system and situation for so long. Do you find any of those fears founded?
I think in some cases the fear is founded. When you take a look at the number of checks that were mailed to people in Michigan who came back because the people aren't there anymore. So I'm an old school guy. I'd like to have everybody vote except senior citizens, those 60 plus, on election day at the polls. That's not going to be the case anymore. So we're just going to have to see whether or not we get a larger turnout because everybody has ballots that have been delivered to their home. And I think we'll see a little bit of that during this primary season, which will be over on August the 4th.
Well, let me let you both weigh in then on where your interest really lies and the races that you're watching closely. Jill, what has your attention right now of all these races that we're watching in Southeast Michigan?
Sure. I do want to say really quickly, though, Devin, that the The issue of any kind of fraud taking place in vote by mail is really infinitesimal. There's serious consequences for it. It's very hard to do because of the practices of election officials. And so I respectfully disagree a little bit with what's been said here, and we'll see. But we've seen that there's no party having an advantage in states where there have been vote by mail for a long time, and it's just better for democracy. But that Oakland County primary for county executive has really got my attention, and I think a lot of folks in the region and in the state, because it's such an important part. We've got two very skilled Democrats, one person in the chair, one person who served as treasurer and who has won every precinct in that county previously. So that's certainly one of the barn burners, along with the congressional race in primary in Detroit.
Steve, that Oakland County race, let's start with that. It is simple as whoever wins that Democratic race is going to win the whole thing, or do we have really good drama coming in November?
You know, probably. Mike Bouchard still does very well. Obviously, Brooks Patterson did well. At this point, the Democrat would be favored because Biden's doing very well in Michigan. But that's because Trump's been running against Trump. And once he begins running against Biden, I think that race is going to tighten. In terms of races I'm looking at, the 13th congressional race, I think, is over. Rashida Tlaib, in the most recent poll I saw, is up by 28 points. I think she's going to have a big victory over Brenda Jones. Looking up in the 10th district, that's a fascinating race. You've got Shane Hernandez, the chair of the House Appropriations Committee in Lansing, running against General Slocum and Lisa McClain. I think the most recent polling I'm seen has Shane Hernandez up by about 10 points. I think at the end of the day, despite the enormous amount of money being spent in that race, I think Shane Hernandez wins, partly because of the contributions made and independent expenditures by Club for Growth, which is a very conservative PAC in Washington. So I think Hernandez wins that one. Shane, a very young guy, very bright, and running against some very competitive campaigns.
Let me just jump in. I got to get to a break, but in both the 10th and the 13th, we've got races that once you've won the primary, you've most likely headed to Congress. Thanks so much, both of you, for your time. We'll talk to you again as we get closer to Election Day. Thanks so much for being here. This is for Flashpoint. Meet the Press coming up next. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.